My name is Tommy, and this story took place on Christmas morning back in 2022. Since it happened around 2 years ago, I might not recall every detail perfectly, but I'll do my best to describe everything as it unfolded. From a very young age, I lived with my aunt and uncle. To keep it short, my mom was deeply addicted to meth, and my dad spent a considerable amount of time in prison. They weren't in any shape to raise a child, so I ended up being taken in by my extended family. Living with my aunt and uncle was a blessing. I always felt cared for and genuinely loved by them, which brought me a sense of happiness and security that I hadn't known before. Anyway, it was Christmas morning, and as an excited 6-year-old, I dashed into the living room. Beneath the tree was a pile of beautifully wrapped presents, a true wonderland for a child like me. I was over the moon with excitement and ran straight to my aunt and uncle's bedroom to wake them up. They were understandably groggy, but kind enough to get up and join me in the living room, ready to share in the festive joy. The three of us spent about an hour unwrapping all the gifts, soaking in the Christmas cheer. Afterward, we started tidying up the mess, crumpled wrapping paper, ribbons, and other scraps of trash scattered everywhere. While I held the trash bag open, something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. Near the stairs, I could have sworn I saw 2 pairs of shoes moving up the steps. Curious and confused, I stared up at the top of the staircase. My aunt noticed me zoning out and asked, "What are you looking at, Tommy?" Without thinking much, I innocently replied, "Santa." I pointed toward the stairs, and my aunt and uncle couldn't help but chuckle. They assumed I was just being a playful kid with an overactive imagination or trying to joke around. But my aunt, curious about what I might have seen, walked over and gently took my hand. Together, we looked up the staircase. That's when she noticed something unusual. A figure partially hidden behind the door of the guest bedroom at the top of the stairs. The room was dimly lit, and the shadows made it impossible for her to determine if it was a man or a woman. Alarm spread across her face, but I was too young to grasp the seriousness of the situation. My aunt let out a startled scream, her voice piercing through the air. My uncle quickly rushed to her side, trying to figure out what was wrong. According to her, the person upstairs didn't attempt to escape or even move. Instead, they remained rooted in place, almost as if they were frozen or deliberately staying out of sight. Fortunately, our neighborhood wasn't far from the police station, which meant help could arrive quickly. My uncle wasted no time and immediately called the authorities, explaining what was happening. My aunt and uncle suspected it might have been someone they knew, but I had a different theory. I believed it could have been a squatter secretly taking refuge in our home. It would explain not only the missing food, but also why they remained inside the house instead of fleeing. Since that eerie Christmas morning, we hadn't seen that person again, though the memory still lingers as a chilling tale to this day. To provide some context, our town had an interesting dynamic during the late 80s and early 90s. Every property would bustle with activity during the harvest months, causing the local economy to thrive for about 3 or even 4 months at a time. Families and workers would pass through, returning 2 or 3 times a year before the harsh winter set in and the agricultural work dried up. By winter, the once bustling community quieted, and life slowed to a crawl. It was during one of these rare snowstorms around Christmas that I found myself at a sleepover with my cousins and a group of friends at a buddy's house. This particular friend had a dad who was ex-military, and his collection of surplus gear was nothing short of legendary. The star attraction of his collection, a pair of night vision goggles. This was a major reason we loved gathering at his place. The goggles were the ultimate cool gadget for a bunch of bored kids stuck indoors during a southern winter, with the snowfall piling up outside. We came up with a game that involved peeking out the frosty windows, taking turns pretending to scout the snowy landscape. We called it something like Army Base, role-playing as soldiers on a secret mission. One of us would put on the night vision goggles and stare out into the falling snow, handing them off after a few moments so the next kid could play the role of lookout. It was the kind of simple, imaginative fun that made us feel like we were part of a real covert operation. Every movement seemed amplified, and through the goggles, the snowy landscape and surrounding woods appeared surreal, almost cinematic. It was mesmerizing to watch how every detail came to life, far more vivid than anything we'd ever seen in a movie. But then, something caught our attention. There was consistent motion coming from the direction of the nearest neighboring house. This particular house had been abandoned for months. We all knew the family that used to live there. They had packed up and left town abruptly, seemingly without any explanation. Rumors floated around that it had something to do with the unstable local economy. One day, even the kids who went to school with us were just gone. No goodbye, no moving truck, and oddly enough, no for sale sign ever appeared. The house simply sat there, empty and eerily quiet, casting a shadow at the corner of the neighborhood. But in that moment, with the aid of the night vision goggles, we spotted something unusual, a faint light flickering in the attic. It was subtle, almost like a candle struggling to stay lit, its glow wavering inconsistently. The goggles made the light appear as if it was blinking on and off, and none of us could make sense of what we were seeing. One by one, we passed the goggles around, each taking turns trying to interpret the strange scene. As typical teenagers, we naturally decided the only reasonable course of action was to investigate. Filled with nervous excitement, we huddled in the mudroom and began layering up for our mission. We donned our warmest jackets, doubled up on gloves, and pulled on beanies to blend into the shadows. Dressed head to toe in black, we felt like an elite paramilitary unit. Even though we were barely 12 years old and entirely unprepared for whatever we might encounter. Rather than taking the road, we decided to cut through the woods, which made the whole adventure feel even more thrilling. In our minds, we were avoiding the watchful gaze of an imaginary sentry or some unknown enemy. As we crept closer to the house, the light in the attic became more visible through a small slot-like window. When we reached the property, it was unmistakable. Someone was inside. The flickering light wasn't just a reflection or a trick of the goggles. It was a candle, its flame dancing erratically as if disturbed by a slight breeze. Each flicker gave the eerie illusion that the light was about to go out entirely. Standing there in the freezing cold, we stared up at the attic, our breaths forming small clouds in the air. The realization hit us all at once. This wasn't just an abandoned house anymore. Someone or something was living there. None of us dared set foot on the creaky porch. It would have made too much noise and given away our position. Instead, we slipped back into the cover of the tree line, crouching low and watching from a distance. Through the faint glow of the candlelight in the attic, we could make out slender shadows shifting across the small window. It was unsettling, but the cold eventually got the better of us, and we decided to retreat to the warmth of the house. Back inside, we kept taking turns with the night vision goggles, monitoring the attic for any more movement until exhaustion finally won out and we called it a night. Before falling asleep, we made a pact. At sunrise, we'd head back to the house and investigate it properly. The next morning, we set off with renewed determination. This time, the attic window was dark and lifeless, giving us a sense of cautious relief. Approaching the house felt easier in daylight. One of our friends, who knew the property well since he used to hang out with the kids who lived there, showed us a loose window that didn't latch properly. It was our way in. Quietly, we slipped inside, carefully closing the window behind us to avoid being seen. The interior was just as abandoned as we'd expected. The house was stripped bare. No furniture, no decorations, not even a stray curtain. Dust coated every surface, and faded outlines on the walls showed where picture frames once hung. We combed through the drawers and cupboards but found nothing. No signs of squatters, no lingering belongings, no trace of anyone. But there was one place we hadn't checked yet. With a mix of excitement and unease, we approached the trapdoor leading to the attic. One of us climbed up first, cautiously pulling the door open. The instant it swung upward, An icy gust of wind rushed past us. Every single one of us felt it, from the front of the line to the back. Even now, I can't deny that it happened. It was too real, too immediate to be our imaginations. What we found next, though, was far worse. As we climbed into the attic, the cold, empty space felt oppressive. It was just as barren as the rest of the house, except for one horrifying sight. In the center of the attic, nailed to a wooden crucifix, was the mutilated body of a lamb. Blood had dried and dark, crusted streaks down its sides, and the stench of decay hit us like a physical force. Surrounding the crucifix were the remnants of 2 burnt-out candles, their wax melted into grotesque shapes. The first few of us who climbed into the attic froze, our brains struggling to process what we were seeing. Then, chaos erupted. Screams broke the silence as we scrambled backward, tripping over each other in a desperate attempt to get away. The smell, the blood, the sheer horror of it all was too much. We fled the house in complete panic, each of us choosing whatever exit was closest. No one looked back, and no one stopped running until we were far, far away from that cursed place. The first thing we did was rush to tell his dad. Yes, the same ex-military dad with all the impressive gear. To us, there was no one better to handle a situation like this. After all, who else had night vision goggles and enough firepower to make us feel invincible? But his reaction wasn't what we expected. He laughed. Hard. He thought we were just a group of overexcited kids, making up ghost stories to entertain ourselves. No matter how much we insisted, he waved it off with a chuckle and told us to let it go. It wasn't until we spent nearly 20 minutes breathlessly recounting every detail of what we had seen, from the flickering attic light to the gruesome scene upstairs, that he finally started to take us seriously. Grumbling a bit, he tucked a pistol into his waistband and headed toward the abandoned house. We followed nervously, keeping a safe distance as he poked around the property, moving cautiously through the rooms. For a few tense moments, we watched him from outside, our imaginations running wild. When he returned, his face had changed. Whatever he'd seen inside was enough to make him hustle back to the house and immediately call the police. That night, the house became the center of attention. Police cars lined the street, and officers swarmed the place, their flashlights flickering through the windows. A full investigation was launched, with reports filed and questions asked. But, like so many strange events in our town, nothing ever came of it. The story fizzled out, buried beneath the chaos of everyday life. Part of the problem was the nature of the town itself. Being a small southern community, we were no strangers to drifters and strangers passing through. It wasn't unusual for weird people to bring weird problems. On top of that, this all happened during the tail end of the Satanic Panic, when law enforcement was quick to dismiss anything resembling ritualistic activity as overblown paranoia. They never seemed to feel the need to dig deeper into what really happened. Tommy's cousin later speculated that it might have been connected to some obscure religious sect, but none of us were ever sure. The most terrifying thought, however, wasn't who had been behind it. It was what could have happened to us. If we'd been foolish enough to enter that house during the ritual, would we have been the ones nailed to that crucifix? That chilling possibility haunted us for years.